It's interesting to note that despite the Wucha police trying to cast me as a Russian operative, the Soviets in the GRU actually despise me. I'm not liked by the Russian intelligence services at all. So it's all very interesting considering I believe I may have actually been caught up in a Soviet conspiracy on several occasions. Indeed, I do not know what these Soviet military intelligence factions were attempting to achieve, but I did seem to get caught up in their conspiracy. So it's all very interesting to note that the Soviet military intelligence capacity, i.e., the GRU, were attempting to mind control a lunatic for some sort of operational reason. So it's all very interesting indeed, although I have theorized that the majority of the Soviet GRU programming in my mind was caused by Samuel Buchan, a master mason of the Ugly, i.e., the United Grand Lodge of England, by a network of 400 operatives that infested my brain with techno demons and attempted to get me to spin out in a GRU Russian military intelligence psychosis, which has happened numerous times. However, on top of that, there is a layer of actual Soviet conspiracy involved in my programming and the events that have occurred over the last few years. Indeed, the Soviets were looking to use me as an opportunity to infiltrate Wiltshire society for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why the Soviet military intelligence capacity would have wanted to use me, considering I am an unstable paranoid schizophrenic, and therefore would probably be pretty useless in an operational capacity. However, the Soviet networks, coordinated by Sergei Borodin of the GRU and Dmitry Polinkov of the FSB, were attempting to utilize my Russian sympathies, which are basically my interest in Russian mental patient culture. They're attempting to utilize my Russian sympathies in that regard for an operation that would have resulted in the death of two people of the Wiltshire Police Department. So it's all quite interesting to note. Who were these people? Jerome Butler and Stephen Nash, my old enemies. It is interesting to note that the Soviet military intelligence capacity were going to use me to kill Jerome Butler and Stephen Nash of Devizes Police, which would have resulted in me being put in Broadmoor. So it's interesting to note that the Soviet military intelligence services, i.e. the GRU, had no interest in actually using me for a genuine operation. They merely wished me to kill these two policemen so that my own operations would be terminated. It's interesting to note the Soviet military intelligence services, i.e. the GRU of the Russian Federation, were going to trick me into killing Police Lieutenant Jerome Butler and Superintendent Stephen Nash of Devizes Police, located at Wiltshire Police Headquarters. And then I would be sent to Broadmoor due to the fact that it would be diminished responsibility due to my psychosis, and I would basically be incarcerated for the remainder of my life. However, I'd have the reputation as a cop killer, so I'd probably have a lot of kudos in Broadmoor. However, I don't really relish the concept of spending my entire life in Broadmoor. So it's interesting that the Soviets were going to trick me. They were going to feign interest in my research and attempt to cause me to sympathize with the Russian cause. and therefore twist my mind and eventually program me basically to kill Police Lieutenant Jerome Butler and Police Superintendent Stephen Nash of Devizes Police. This would terminate my operations. Indeed, my own operations seem to be scaring the Soviet military intelligence capacity because there are so many networks within Soviet military intelligence that want a conflict with the United Kingdom. And they worry that my theories may destabilize that cause. So it's all very interesting to note that the Soviets have been attempting to program me. Indeed, I even theorized that the Soviets may have been behind the beaming, so we changed perpetrators again. However, I do sincerely believe that Wiltshire Police were involved in the beaming, which is interesting. Is there a synthesis here between Wiltshire Police and the Soviets? Now, this is what we need to determine. Are Wiltshire Police operatives Lieutenant Jerome Butler and Superintendent Stephen Nash, as well as Chief Constable Charles Fergus, interconnected with the Soviets? Indeed, it strikes me that these may be triple agents, because they are technically working for the British police services, but are also GRU operatives, but their true loyalty is to the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst. So I appear to have got myself heavily caught up in espionage. Indeed, it seems we were days away at this point from an approach by Soviet military intelligence towards me in Warminster. So I'm hoping that my telepathy has figured out the Soviet military intelligence plot, and therefore I can talk about it on camera, which means it won't happen. So it's all good. Indeed, when I pump something into the public domain, something within intelligence machinations changes, because that information is now in the public domain. It's interesting to note, several MI5 operatives around this region are also triple agents, i.e. they are not solely MI5 agents, they are also GRU operatives, but their true loyalty is to the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, such as was the case with Kim Philby. Indeed, Kim Philby was an MI6 operative, a KGB operative, and his true loyalty was to the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst. The same was the case with Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was originally a counterintelligence corps operative, and later a KGB operative codenamed Bohr, but his true loyalty was to the extraterritorial Black Operations Shadow Agency, the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, who now seem to have a monopoly on both Western and Soviet intelligence capacities. Notice I'm utilizing the term Soviet to describe the Russian intelligence services. Indeed, the Russian intelligence services are still Soviet intelligence. Indeed, Russia is still the Soviet Union. Perestroika was a deception. So it's all very interesting to note. Indeed, Anatoly Golitsyn wasn't a real defector, but he came out with some very interesting information. Indeed, it seems Golitsyn was a Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst operative, so he was the opposite of Kim Philby. Basically, he was the same as Kim Philby, but going in the opposite direction. Indeed, Anatoly Golitsyn was originally a KGB operative who became a CIA operative, but his true loyalty was to the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst. However, I am very grateful for certain information that Anatoly Golitsyn put into the public domain. It's all very interesting to consider the intelligence machinations and the amount of deceptions that there are. Indeed, it's all very confusing. Indeed, the Soviet military intelligence capacity, i.e. the GRU, wanted me, / want me, to murder Jerome Butler and Stephen Nash of Devizes Police. However, I have no wish to spend the rest of my life in Broadmoor, even if I would have the reputation as a cop killer. I do not relish the prospect of spending my life locked up. Indeed, the last 5 years were enough, really. Indeed, the British psychiatric establishment had heard rumours that I was a double agent. However, I'm merely a lunatic. I am not an operative for any agency. I am a psycho. That is all I am. It's interesting to consider that, as well as being under a targeted individual program coordinated by the British, I'm also a targeted individual of the Russian state. So it's interesting to consider the Soviet military intelligence capacity had me tracked at all times. Even here, in this small town of Warminster, as I've stated, the GRU operate in Wiltshire out of Salisbury. So the distances involved are not particularly large. Indeed, the Soviet networks are operative for the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, so you have to consider that. Indeed, Soviet communism is illuminist in its tendencies, the same way the British Empire continuums are now illuminist, and the Nazi power bastion is an illuminist power bastion, so you have to consider all of that. Indeed, Christopher Story's framework of conspiracy was true, though he seems to have missed out a few aspects, especially regarding the ritual child abuse rings being run by the British police, especially here in Wiltshire. Indeed, I would not mind if Jerome Butler and Stephen Nash of Devizes Police dropped dead, but it shan't be me carrying out their murders. However, if anyone did, I would not shed a tear. I'm now a little bit paranoid that Soviet military intelligence, i.e. the GRU, will assassinate Jerome Butler and Stephen Nash, and it will somehow be linked back to me. However, with this information in the public domain now, I have a defense. So, it's all very interesting to consider. Indeed, my only real interest in Russia is Russian mental patient culture. Indeed, I despise all forms of totalitarianism. And Soviet totalitarianism is one of the worst systems of despotism known to mankind. Because, as I have stated, the British police are forming their own secret police in conjunction with the security services that is going to be modelled on the KGB during the Soviet era. Indeed, the security services will have the power to arrest. It is all very interesting to consider. Indeed, targeted individual programs are going to be rolled out a lot more in the future. Indeed, I believe my targeting by the British police may have been one of the heaviest examples of a targeted individual program yet seen in the United Kingdom. In the United States, this stuff happens all the time. In the United Kingdom, this seems to be not quite so common. Indeed, my targeting seems to have been one of the heaviest yet. It's all very interesting to consider. Indeed, what role did the Soviet military intelligence capacity play in my targeting? In terms of the radiation, it may actually be none. I'm not entirely sure. I'm convinced that the Soviet military intelligence capacity, i.e. the GRU, were controlling the beams. Indeed, I'm pretty sure it was a network of British policemen connected to Julie Ferris, the mother of Emma Ferris. So I'm fingering Melksham Police and the Devizes Police set up for this targeting. However, whether or not they had any communication with the Soviet military intelligence capacity in this regard, I do not know. It's always interesting to note that the Soviet military intelligence services, a network coordinated by Sergei Borodin of the GRU, in communion with Dmitry Pelinkov of the FSB, wanted me to assassinate Police Lieutenant Jerome Butler and Police Superintendent Stephen Nash of the Devizes Police Headquarters, i.e. Wiltshire Police Headquarters in Devizes. Though technically these guys are Devizes Police, but it's interesting to note that I would have been set up as a patsy. Indeed, this assassination may have been the trigger for World War III between the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union, i.e. Russian Federation. Soviet Union is still the Soviet Union, doesn't really matter. Between the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union. We'll go with that. It's interesting to consider the fact that the Soviets wanted me to assassinate a couple of Wiltshire police higher ups so that the British population would be swayed into wanting a war with the Soviet Union. Indeed, I would have been miscast as a Soviet agent. Indeed, there are so many networks that want to patsy me at the moment. They all seem to be operating on the same themes. It seems everyone wants to cast me as a Soviet agent. But the Soviets treat mental patients terribly. So it's all very interesting indeed. Sometimes when I speak affectionately about the Russian military intelligence capacity, it's because of the mind control programming I've been under. Indeed, the Soviet military intelligence capacity, i.e. the GRU, are some of the most terrible people. They are rapists and thugs, and oftentimes Nazi savages. And as I've stated, the majority of the GRU are operative for the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, this shadow entity which runs the biggest child ritual abuse and human sacrifice network on the face of the planet, which is in the tradition of the Bavarian Illuminati. So it's all very interesting to consider what this network is. Indeed, this Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst network also runs British intelligence to about 75% capacity. So it's all very interesting to note that British intelligence is in the clutches of the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, just as is British Freemasonry. It's all very interesting to note, as I've stated, that the GRU infiltrated the Masonic lodges through their agents within MI5 during the 1950s. But these were triple agents who were actually working for the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst. So it's all very interesting to note that this wasn't technically a Soviet penetration of the British Masonic lodges. It was a Nazi one. You also have to consider that the Nazis are formed of bodies of German Masonic orders and German Masonic lodges. So it's interesting to note this was an inter-Masonic war for civil war, basically. Though many British Masonic lodges were already Illuminized by this point. This GRU penetration of the Masonic lodge for the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst was merely a continuation of the illumination, so to speak, of illuminization of British lodges. Yes, illuminization, that's a better word for it. So very interesting to consider. This overarching theory that Christopher Story posited does seem to be the right trajectory to go on. Though I am suspicious of Christopher Story and his royalism regarding the British monarchy annoys me, as did his reverence for Maggie Thatcher. So we're going off on a different trajectory, but I'm a schizophrenic man. I am not a Soviet agent. So it's all very interesting considering things I have said in this schizophrenic video diary up to now, and also things I said on my channels a few years ago where I was convinced I was an ethnic Russian, which isn't the case. I am not an ethnic Russian. I'm a schizophrenic man. That is all I am. So it's all very interesting to consider the fact that I have been caught up in a Soviet conspiracy, which works in the British police's favour. Indeed, British intelligence would have let this Soviet operation happen. The Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst operatives within British intelligence would have allowed this and supported it, and most probably financed it in some way. So the idea was that I would assassinate Police Lieutenant Jerome Butler and Police Superintendent Stephen Nash of Devizes Police I would assassinate them, and then be arrested and sent to Broadmoor, and then I would have been cast as a Soviet agent, which would have begun the World War III conflagration between the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union. Indeed, it's all very interesting to consider that the Soviets were going to trick me and set up a lunatic as a patsy, as I've been predicting would happen. Though I wasn't entirely sure how it would happen. It's interesting that the Soviets are making a plan for me. So now I've put this information into the public domain. Hopefully this won't happen. Though I'm still expecting Soviet military intelligence to cause me trouble in the future, indeed. I'm going to leave it there now.